Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, Senior A English, and we now turn to Derek Walcott's 23 from Midsummer. Let's just meet Walcott and get some background for this amazing poem. On page 199, his dates 1930 to 2017, born on the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, where he spoke both the island dialect and English. Graduated from the University of the West Indies. As a precocious 18-year-old, Walcott published the first of his many volumes of poetry, 25 poems, by using $200 that he borrowed to print and distributed on the street. He went on to have a prolific career as both a poet and playwright. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992. Now the background for 23 from Midsummer. In colonial times, British settlers brought enslaved Africans to work on their plantations in the West Indies. Slavery finally ended in the 1830s. Many present-day West Indians have emigrated to Britain only to encounter prejudice and hardship. Their frustrations erupted in the April 1981 riots in the neighborhood of Brixton, London. Let's turn now to page 290 and let's work with the poem. With the stamping hiss and scurry of green lemmings, midsummer's leaves race to extinction, like the roar of a Brixton riot tunneled by water hoses. They seethe towards autumn's fire. It's in their nature, being men as well as leaves, to die for the sun. The leaf stems tug at their chains, the branches bending like boar cattle under Tory whips that drag every wagon nearer to apartheid. And for me, that closes the child's fairy tale of an antique England. Fairy rings, thatched cottages fenced with dog roses, a green gale lifting the hair of Warwickshire. I was there to add some color to the British theatre. But the blacks can't do Shakespeare. They have no experience. This was true. Their thick skulls bled with rancor when the riot police and the skinheads exchanged quips you could trace to the sonnets or the Moor's eclipse. Praise had bled my lines white of any more anger, and snow had inducted me into white fellowships, while Calibans howled down the barred streets of an empire that began with Cadman's raceless dew and is ending in the alleys of Brixton, burning like Turner's ships. Now, to really appreciate Walcott's poem, it's important that we do pay attention to the footnotes that are provided. For example, the line at line 7, 8 of Tory whips that drag every like boar cattle under Tory whips that drag every wagon nearer to apartheid. In the 1600s, the Boers, people of Dutch descent, colonized South Africa, where apartheid, racial segregation, was later practiced. The Tories held power in Britain when it won control over South Africa in the Boer War of 1899 to 1902. Well, what is this poem about at level 1? Well, it's a statement, isn't it? It's a statement of what it means to come to recognition, very much like the Kincaid piece. The speaker in our poem here has got to come to the realization that the child's fairy tale, line 910, of an antique England. And what is that fairy tale? Fairy rings, thatched cottages fenced with dog roses, a green gale lifting the hair of Warwickshire. That I was there to add some color to the British theater. The blacks can't do Shakespeare, in quotation marks, they have no experience, is of course a racial comment about doing Shakespeare. The irony, of course, a few moments later, is that Shakespeare wrote a play that we of course study called Othello that speaks directly to issues of prejudice. Of course, Shakespeare's last play, Tempest, 1611, will posit young Caliban, and as we can see in the footnote, Caliban, often the deformed creature in Shakespeare's play Tempest, Enslaved by the enchanter Prospero, Caliban's been interpreted as a native who rebels against his island's colonizer, Prospero. It is significant then that here in this poem we have all of the tensions that are inevitable if we are going to talk at all about the history of England and of course America as well. Namely, that people of color have to accept this crazy notion that they should celebrate a heritage which posits them as nothing more than the ground, the soil out of which grew this civilization. How does one come to deal with that? Kincaid, of course, speaks about it in her text. We're making a 3A observation here. Here, obviously, the speaker is asking about the riots that were specific in 81, specific to addressing some of the deep, deep racial concerns that were a part of that time, and sadly still remain a part of our culture and, of course, England's culture as well. What are we going to say about this now in annotated form at level 2A, themes, messages? No question, racism is a troubling part of our heritage and one that we've got to deal with, one we've got to wrestle with, no question about it. There is no ignoring it, this poem suggests. Of course, it affects all sides in the equation as well, as another major message here. At 2B, major symbolism going on here, compelling this idea that in the same way that Kincaid will play the game, a child has to come to terms with the fairy tales of an antique England, right? At 3A, obviously you can jot down, this works rather well with our Kincaid passage as well as any number of other titles that come to mind that expose the challenges of racism. I would add to our list already created in our Kincaid study, Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous essay where he opens with oppressed peoples respond to oppression in 3 characteristic fashions. The first is acquiescence, the second is hatred, and then the third, of course, is nonviolent resistance. Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about coming to terms with the child's fairy tale? What's a time in your life when you had to come to terms with that? Obviously, this poem has to do with issues of race as well. How do you deal with that? How do you understand that in your own life, and as well as you observe those around you? No question, Walcott, Kincaid, challenging us to think, and we're grateful that they have done so. Thank you.